All right, I hate to cut short the conversations, but if you can grab your seats, we're going to get going with our final panel here. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for sticking with us until our final panel here. I hope we can really tie together a lot of the strands that we've been talking about today and really give you some practical advice to take home on how to handle this tech issue. Just really quickly, I'm glad to see a number of you have already got Claire's book. It's absolutely excellent. We still have, I think, a few more copies out there. Claire's got to run right after this panel, but I believe she said you can stay in touch with her, all that fun stuff. So make sure that you get your copy of the tech exit while you can. So our last panel today, we're talking about sort of practical steps that we need to take in the face of all of these technological devices that have taken over our lives. At the outset, I kind of want to just talk a little bit about why I got interested in this. I think it was about 2 years ago now. So I was late to this. Everyone else that we've been hearing from today has thought far more about this issue than I have. It was about 2 years ago for Lent. Normally, I give up booze, which is good for me. 2 years ago, I decided that I would give up social media, like completely get off my phone, like not only social media, like all that kind of stuff. And I was kind of appalled at how difficult that was for me. Like I was like, I don't think I have a big issue. I'm not on my phone that much. My wife would disagree. But it was like actually really, really tough. And at the end of Lent, Easter Sunday, I was like, that was actually fantastic. Like I was far more present with my kids. I was far more productive. Like it is a very good thing. And that led me into reading a lot of the research and the writing that a lot of these guys have done and really just seeing the crisis that we have, especially in schools with these devices. It's a big thing that was attractive to me about Chelsea. I think Chelsea was a leader on this issue. I know there's been a lot of schools and even in the public policy space that are catching up on this now. But I think it's a really dire thing that we need to address. And I'll mention one other anecdote on this as well. I had the privilege recently of doing a week-long teachers seminar. So one of my hats here at Chelsea, I teach our civics class. And it was largely, with one exception, it's largely public school teachers from basically the Mid-Atlantic. And obviously their approach to education is very different from what we do here at Chelsea. But I asked them one evening, we were at the hotel, I was like, sitting around, and I said, what is the biggest challenge that you have in your public schools? Every single one of them said phones. Like without even missing a beat, every single one said phones. And it was a little surprising to me. I mean, I went to public school in the 2000s. This was, thankfully, still flip phone era. We weren't allowed to have flip phones in school. Like I distinctly remember walking outside. I wasn't even in the hallway, walking outside at Herndon High School in like 2007 and flipping over my flip phone. And the campus security guy comes over, takes my flip phone, takes it to the office. So something happened between 2007 and 2025 where not only do we think that it's good to have phones in schools, we think it's good to have smartphones and social media. I mean, the horror stories that these public school teachers were telling me, you have students in their classes who hop on Grubhub and order McDonald's to some random door at their public school that some random courier is coming up to a school full of minors and dropping a bag of food at the door. I was like, how do you allow this? He said that another story. They're like in between classes, every single student hops on TikTok and is taking TikTok videos through the hallway in between classes. I was like, well, why don't you take the phones? He's like, no. A lot of teachers like being in the videos. So they go in the background of the TikTok video and they're like clowning around with the kids. And then the biggest eye-opener, though, to me, which I think I hope we can get into in this conversation, is I said, why doesn't the administration do anything to stop it? And the, again, unanimous answer was the parents. The parents want this. And the biggest, again, anecdote that drove that home to me was one of the teachers said that it is a not infrequent circumstance where a kid is literally on a phone call in the back of his room during a lecture, and he comes back and he says, hang up the phone, and the kid says, hey, tell that to my mom. And he literally takes the phone and has to tell the parent, your son can talk to you at the end of class. We are in the middle of class. Please let me continue. So we have a huge issue on our hands here. Thankfully, we don't have that at Chelsea. Um, but I mentioned that, I think, to really frame the sort of level of the problem that we have here. Now, thankfully, again, due to the hard work of a lot of the people you've heard from here today, a lot of states and a lot of at the policy level are waking up to this. Here in Virginia, Governor Youngkin has actually been really great on this. His wife, the First Lady of Virginia, has been really good on this as well. So we are starting to see from the policy level some solutions come down. But again, one thing that really struck me talking to these public school teachers is even those who are in districts where they're starting to be phone free, the amount of resistance is crazy. So that speaks to, I think, a lot of how as parents, we need to be out in front on this issue. We need to be creating the conditions in the social circles where it is acceptable to not have these devices. We need the policy as well. We can talk a little bit about how the policy fits into that. But I think there's a big role for parents to and social circles to play as well. So I'm going to leave it there because these guys know a lot more about the issue than I do. Similar to the first panel, we're going to have some prepared remarks from each of our panelists before we open it up to conversation and hear from you guys as well. First, immediately to my left is Brad Littlejohn, Director of Programs, is that correct? At American Compass. If you're not familiar with American Compass, it's an absolutely incredible organization. Go look up all the great work that they are doing. And Brad is doing a great job over there as well. And he's going to be talking to us on the purpose-driven tech life. Just thought about all that. So, Brad, take it away.
Thank you. All right, this is working. All right. Thank you, Emil. It's such a pleasure to be here. Such a joy to be able to address this topic with a group of parents that I think already get it to such a high degree. But that said, I would imagine that for many of you, if you're like most Americans, odds are when you woke up this morning, you opened up your laptop, checked your email, then maybe you saw an interesting Substack post. You skimmed it, you followed some links. Half an hour later, perhaps you found yourself watching some dumb news clip about a celebrity. Your morning coffee still in the pot, your morning devotional time window rapidly closing. Later in the day, perhaps you found yourself impulsively pulling your phone from your pocket and opening 2 or 3 apps for no particular reason. Then putting it back in your pocket until a few minutes later you felt a phantom buzz on your thigh and whipped out your phone in response to an imaginary notification. Now, obviously, this is not how any sane person approaches the physical world. If I step out my front door in the morning and start down the sidewalk, I usually have a reason and a destination. After all, walking is slow and it takes energy. Even if I hop in the car and say, I just need to go for a drive to clear my head, I'll still need to keep my hands on the steering wheel. In the physical world, aimlessness has immediate consequences. And so we have structured the physical world around us for directionality. We have roads, we have sidewalks. The problem is that the internet is not like that. Once upon a time, back in the 1990s, remember we dubbed it the information superhighway. But that implies way more directionality and structure than we actually experience. It's much more like an infinite and ever-shifting maze, and one with powerful magnets that drag us subconsciously from one dead end to another. Now, this individual aimlessness when it comes to technology, I think, is symptomatic of a society-wide syndrome. For many decades now, Americans have rarely asked whether a new technology should be deployed and developed. We think if we can do it, then we should, right? We'll figure out what to do with it later. You're not against progress, are you? Now, of course, that question is nonsensical because the idea of progress implies a destination, implies a teleology, something that you are a goal that you are progressing toward. But too often our innovators do not seem to have such a clear goal in mind. Now, the top AI scientists may explicitly dream of creating a superintelligence to worship. They have a goal, just a really bad goal. But I think when you ask most of their followers what it is they're trying to achieve by more, better, faster AI processes, they'll shrug their shoulders and say, beating China, I guess? Recently, I asked a leading engineer at a major tech company why they had simply added their AI companion to all of our computers and programs without asking users whether they wanted to use it. And he was confused by the question. We just figured people would, he said. Now, this way of thinking, I think, exposes the absurdity in the tool metaphor that we often use with technology, as my friend John was saying in the first session. We talk about technology as if it's just a tool, but we don't really treat it like a tool. And part of what I'm wanting to outline in my talk is how we can, at least in some measure, push back against this modern technological order and subordinate some of these technologies to the level of tools again. But it requires a great deal of self-consciousness. So you'll hear people say things like the computer or the smartphone or AI is just a tool. What matters is how you use it. But nobody picks up a hammer at the beginning of the day and walks around swinging it randomly at any object in sight. Right? No, you encounter a problem that you need to solve, you go to the toolbox, you sort through it, you pick out the tool that solves that problem, you use it, and then you put it back in the toolbox. That's not what we do with our smartphones. And of course, the hammer itself emerged as a technological innovation, one point in time, in response to a specific problem that needed to be solved in construction, as did later more sophisticated construction tools like drills or miter saws. Now notice also, a tool only remains fit for purpose if the hand and mind that wield that tool are strong enough. If a child picks up a sledgehammer, odds are that rather than pulling the head forward onto the target, the child is going to be pulled over backward by the weight of it. A novice carpenter who's handed a miter saw with no training is more apt to cut his finger in two than cut the board in two. So the more powerful the tool is, the more powerful the tool user must be. And this is one of the beautiful insights of J.R.R. Tolkien in Lord of the Rings, which is in many ways a book about technology. Right? The ring is this ultimate temptation of technology. You also have the Palantiri, the seeing stones, both of which I think have interesting parallels to AI. But and notice in those stories, the wiser characters recognize they like you hobbits are not powerful enough to even use this tool. You're going to just be used by it. I might be powerful enough to use it, but for me, then it poses an even greater danger of using it for evil. Now, so the more powerful the more powerful the tool user must be. And this is true not just of individuals, but of cultures and societies. In 1437, there was no culture strong enough to subdue the printing press to its will, so the technology took on a life of its own. And that's happening to us today. So too often, our leading technologists are no better than me before my morning coffee, or a 12-year-old on Instagram. They're playing with the tech simply because it's there without a clear sense of what it's for. And although this larger cultural malaise demands public policy solutions, we cannot wait on policy to solve our problems. And as our founders understood, we cannot practice corporate self-government unless we first learn to practice individual self-government. So a purpose-driven tech life must begin at home. So what might this look like? Well, I certainly can't claim to model one myself. Right? The examples in the first paragraph are autobiographical. But every parent hopes to give their child a better life and a better education than their own. And so for us today, that should mean seeking to give our children a more purpose-driven tech life than we have been able to follow ourselves. So for my wife and I, this began with initially trying to protect our children from the soul-destroying poison of online pornography. As someone who's written about these issues for years, I was well aware of the dangers that they were likely to face. But we soon realized that the traditional approach for most parental controls, which is content filtering, was no good. There are too many loopholes. So instead, we used a feature that most parental controls have, but most people don't really think in terms of, which is whitelisting, right? Which is where you, instead of having a list of bad websites that you manually or automatically curated that are blocked, rather, everything is blocked by default, except for a list of websites that you put that are specifically enabled. So we created a list of websites for each of our kids' accounts that made sense for each of our kids to have access to, and we enabled only those websites. If they wanted to access another site for some purpose, they could request it. My wife would get a notification, and then she could either thumbs up or thumbs down. Or if they needed a bit more scope to browse and search, researching a topic, then we could fully enable the browser for a limited time only, and then restore the constraints. So we did this with other devices too. With the iPad, right? Our policy is you bring it to the parent to explain what you need it to use, what you need to use it for. And if it was a good use, we would type in the passcode and then make sure it was locked again as soon as you'd finished using it. So we started designing our entire family tech life around this principle, and we've even tried with imperfect success to model it ourselves. So rather than the default being anything, anywhere on demand with a few danger signs posted in particularly dangerous areas, we decided the default was that devices are off and websites are inaccessible unless and until they're needed for a particular purpose, to serve as a particular tool. So my smartphone, I've set up so it has very few apps, and none of them have push notifications enabled. So that means, in theory at least, I only use the device if I positively choose to. I have no web browser on it, which means that when friends text me links, I have to manually copy and paste them into my email, which I do have on my smartphone. Then I email them to myself, and then later on, I'll read them on my laptop. So this seems like a pain, but it's actually great because it means that I avoid being distracted throughout the day, and I can have a sort of designated article reading time rather than being co-opted by a perpetual information overload. Now, from talking to other parents, we found that this whitelisting approach is pretty radical. But why should it be? After all, it's a lot closer to how we approach the offline world. When you move to a new community, you don't tell your kids, okay, spread out, neighborhood's yours. Feel free to crash on any couch in the neighborhood or help yourself to the goodies in any fridge. I mean, this may be how it is in Hyattsville from what I hear, but most neighborhoods, you don't do this. You don't say, yeah, spread out unless the door is locked and the owner objects. Right? No, what you do is you buy or build a house with 4 walls, a ceiling, and doors, and perhaps a fence around the yard defining the space that is yours that your kids are to play in. You choose a house based on a specific purpose or set of purposes, and although you might leave it to visit the park or the neighbors, you don't just wander aimlessly around the neighborhood. The walls and doorways of the physical world remind us that we are finite creatures. God designed us for certain ends, and we flourish best when we live within those limits according to those ends. The purposes that we pursue determine the shape of those limits. And as we grow and mature, the limits should gradually expand to enable us to pursue higher and grander purposes. Now, some external limits we may then end up removing altogether, but only after we've internalized the limits. That is, when we've formed clear enough purposes that we understand instinctively what tools are for and how to use them and when. And it's been beautiful to watch this in our own kids' lives. So my oldest is 16. He's here. My 11-year-old is here. And my 11-year-old, Oliver here, although he has a laptop for homeschooling, and now he actually knows the password to his own laptop. For a long time, he had to bring it to us to type it in. But he knows not to type in the password to the laptop unless it's for some specific authorized purpose. So he'll come and ask me, can I play chess.com before logging into his computer? Now, he might ask me a lot more often than I would like, but I will say I've almost never caught him just logging in without asking. To be honest, I wish I had internalized this much self-regulation in my own tech life. It's all too tempting to pretend that because I'm a busy professional, that whenever I'm whipping out my phone, it's because of some essential world-saving purpose. But my kids can see through the charade. But they don't envy me my cyborg life. They are learning that limits are actually what make freedom possible. So let's pray that our culture also relearns this lesson before it's too late.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Brad. That really sets things up very, very nicely. And now we go on to Claire Morell, author of the book that many of you have in front of you, fellow at Ethics and Public Policy Center, which is another great organization. So, Claire, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with you all today. So, as you know from the title of my book, I am arguing for a tech exit. But what exactly does that mean? If you read the subtitle, it says A Practical Guide to Freeing Kids and Teens from Smartphones. And I just want to start a little bit about why I wrote the book. I think actually nowadays more parents are aware of the harms of smartphones and social media to their kids. There's been more public news about this. Jonathan Haidt, Jean Twenge have documented the harms. However, I think that the strategies that most parents are using are ineffective. So let me explain. And this is how I kind of start my book, with the premise of these kind of harm mitigation strategies, which had been sold to parents by the tech companies, that your children can enjoy our products and they won't be harmed by them if you just put screen time limits and parental controls in place. But as I examine in my book, screen time limits are no match for the addictive design of these technologies. And the tech companies know this. The time limit will never be enough, because the effect that is elicited in the brain by these constant bursts of dopamine that children are getting through these online platforms and devices creates a constant craving and compulsion. And actually, the brain, as soon as they get off social media or off the phone, it actually goes into a dopamine deficit state. It does not return to baseline, but in order to kind of rebalance the brain and achieve homeostasis, it goes into a deficit that then incentivizes the child to go on and do it again. And so what that means is, even if they're not physically on the device or in the app, their mental and emotional space is still occupied by the virtual world long after they leave it, because of that craving that is induced by even a small amount of use. And so I try to explain in my book that we've had a metaphor problem as a culture, where we have treated these interactive screens more like sugar, something that can be enjoyed in moderation, but not too much, when in reality they're much more akin to digital fentanyl. And the brain imaging studies show that the structural changes that happen in the brain over time mirror those that happen in brains addicted to highly addictive drugs. And so it's not a stretch to say that these technologies are really affecting children's brain development, even in small amounts. The second principle I explain of the strategies that are not working the way parents would hope are parental controls. And Brad just kindly documented some of the ways that there's so many loopholes. But it is impossible really to effectively lock down a smartphone. I mean, there are hundreds and thousands of apps, each with their own in-app browser, their own portal to the internet. Even apps that sound innocuous, like educational games, often have social media components where complete strangers can be messaging children, where they can still encounter dangerous content. And often, most of the most egregious apps like Snapchat, TikTok, Roblox, they block any third-party controls from accessing what's happening inside the app. So the best it can tell parents is how much time their child has spent, but it can't actually block out dangerous content. And really, at the end of the day, this principle of control, who has control? It's the tech companies. Their algorithms are completely controlling what a child's experience is on these apps. As a parent, you have no ability to change the algorithms or to see into what your child is seeing or doing in their feed. And as Brad has documented, others have explained, it's really all too easy for children to stumble into really dangerous places online. And unfortunately, the algorithms go to work. Even if a curious child just lingers on a sexual post for 5 seconds, it will quickly just feed more and more extreme types of that content into their feed. And so I then explained, well, then what do parents do? And so the reason I wrote this book is I really want to help change the culture. Because what I hear from most parents is they didn't really want to give their child a smartphone or allow them on a social media platform, but they felt pressured into it because everyone else in their class had one. And that's what I want to change. And it really starts with us. Emil was saying this as well. Schools can play a critical role, but it starts with us as parents on the front lines, that we have to come together and make this an unacceptable part of childhood. I want smartphones in childhood to become like smoking, that it would become taboo, that we don't give these harmful things to our children, and we're protecting their developing brains and their souls. And so I just briefly want to give a high-level overview then, like, how do we do this? And this is why I wrote my book, is I wanted to give these practical steps to parents like you all who are on the front lines. And so first I will say, it's never too late to reverse course. If you are regretting technology that you've already given to your child, there's hope, because it's actually possible to reverse course. And there's a whole science to this, that digital detoxes actually work, that the brain can reset itself. And they recommend like 30 days. I know Emil did all of Lent. It's great. But there's actually a science.
I didn't count Sundays. That's not part of Lent.
Okay, well, you have to do this straight. Doing a straight 30 days really helps a child's developing nervous system come down from the dysregulated stress response that the screens induce. It allows the brain's dopamine levels to rebalance, to find a homeostasis, because the problem is that kids actually become desensitized to pleasures in the real world when they're getting used to these artificially high levels of dopamine. Like, real life actually feels boring and mundane, and their brains are in this chronic dopamine deficit state then when they're not on the devices and screens, and it leads to depression. I mean, part of the reason we're seeing such a spike in the teen mental health crisis is actually related to the impacts that this is having on the brain level. So the detox actually really helps reset their brain, their nervous system. And so I've heard from so many parents who said, we thought it would be impossible to deal with our child without the screen. Like, even the thought of a detox was like, how are we going to do this? Because the screen does have this calming effect in the short term, often when you hand it over to a child. But the cumulative long-term effects is over time, it just dysregulates their nervous system more. And so the encouraging news is that these families who've detoxed it, they just couldn't believe the results that they saw in their kids, how their personality came back and their appetite for things in the real world, their desire for in-person relationships. And so I would just encourage you, even if the tech exit, being free from smartphones and social media through the teen years till adulthood seems daunting, to just start with a 30-day digital detox. I think anyone can commit to something for 30 days. And when you see the results for yourself, I think it will encourage you to keep going. So if we've detoxed and we've reversed course, then how do we sustain this lifestyle over the long term? And so if detoxing is fasting from screens, then the long term is that we feast on real life. And so I use the acronym FEAST in my book to help parents remember the 5 key principles that make up what I call the tech exit. And so just briefly, and obviously I go into a lot more detail in the book, so I'd highly commend you actually read that for the details. But on a high level, I'll just go through each of those acronyms in brief. So F stands for Find Other Families. And this is what I was getting at with we as parents together can change the culture, is that the families I spoke with and interviewed, and I interviewed dozens of families, and I will acknowledge, like, I'm a mom of young kids. So I have a 5, 3, and 1.5-year-old. So I haven't navigated the teen years saying no to smartphones and social media myself. And so I realized I had an experience gap. And so I interviewed families who have successfully done this through high school and launched kids to college, because I wanted to understand how they had done this. And one of the critical factors they all emphasized to me was just finding 1 or 2 other parents in their community who also were not having kids on smartphones and social media. It wasn't necessarily everyone in their peer group, but just a few other families created a little counter pressure contingent against the pressures towards smartphones. And so I give more examples of how we as parents can create these counter pressures to push the smartphones back out of childhood. I give examples even how you could talk to your neighbors on your street, that there are neighborhoods that have kind of gone phone free for kids just by talking to each other about the culture that they wanted on their block, and they wanted kids playing outside. And one mom said, even the tech restrictions may land slightly differently for different families in the neighborhood, but they've all agreed on the positive vision, which is kids playing outside, riding bikes together with no phones. And that just changed the dynamic on their street. And even some of the kids who did have tech started coming outside and playing with their kids because they were attracted by the real life relationships. And so providing that positive, enriching social life for our kids in the real world really helps them see how cheap the substitute is for the digital world. So finding other families and working to actually help build your child's social life in person, because I recognize, I'm not going to lie, there are certain costs or hurdles to overcome in living out a tech exit lifestyle. And one of those is really helping our children find friendships. I do think it's important in that friendship piece. And so I recognize that saying no to social media and smartphones means, as parents, we're going to have to be more intentional about helping our kids find good friendships in real life, which is so much better for them than the shallow connections on social media. Okay, E is educate, explain, and exemplify. So I often get said, well, don't these kids just go off then and binge on tech later when they go to college if they haven't had it from 0 to 18? And from the families I spoke with, they said like the opposite was true, that their kids had actually formed their habits without it, and they didn't have the same dependence, and that they could actually truly approach these technologies as a tool because their habits had been formed without it. Instead of giving a child a tool too powerful for them, they'd had the time to develop the self-mastery to actually be able to use it well. But another important thing they emphasized was these restrictions weren't just kind of handed down without any explanation. They really worked to educate their kids on the harms they were trying to protect them from and explain their rationale, because they wanted their children to own that for themselves, even as adults, like a proper understanding of how we can use the internet as a tool instead of being used by it. And I really appreciated Mike's point on the prior panel. I tell people all the time, because I get the question, well, how will they be prepared for this technological age in the workplace and in college? Smartphones don't equal tech skills. Smartphones teach kids how to scroll and to be constantly entertained. They're not teaching kids how to code or develop, even like how to use Microsoft Excel or other things they might need for the workplace. And so, so all that to say, explaining and educating. And then this is the most convicting, is exemplifying the kind of use we'd want our kids to have of smartphones as parents. That's the primary way we'll teach them how to use this wisely when they are adults, is by modeling that ourselves. And so adopting practices, I loved the examples Brad listed. I gave up my own smartphone 2 years ago and have opted for a Wise phone, which doesn't have internet or social media or anything on it. And so you don't necessarily have to give up your smartphone, but just finding ways to dumb it down. And more than anything, just distancing ourselves from our devices, especially when we're with our kids, to show them that we value people more than we value our phones. A is adopt alternatives, and I really just try to explain, like, there are better alternative phones available than the smartphone for when a child gets to an age where they truly need a communication device to stay in touch with parents, or they're driving, opting for these alternative phones. And I list kind of all the examples of those alternative phones in the appendix in my book. But just, I would encourage you to just not accept the tyranny of the smartphone, that if you're told your child needs a smartphone to participate in this soccer team because this is how they communicate through XYZ app, I will tell you, these parents just said, we just didn't accept that. We found workarounds. We talked to the coach and said, my child's not going to be having a smartphone to participate, in this team. You're going to need to find another way to get in touch with us. And just for every parent that stands up to that, it makes it easier on the next parent and kind of pushes, again, this tyranny of smartphones out of childhood. S is set digital accountability and family screen rules. And so I loved the examples that Brad was giving, just of, okay, then how do we teach kids to use certain technologies like a computer wisely in the home? And just very briefly, the two main principles all these families had in common was that any screen use was always public and purposeful, that there was public use, so anyone in the home could walk by and see what they were doing. That's that digital accountability, and that it was purposeful. They were going online for a specific purpose. And Mike was mentioning this earlier, just about kids teaching themselves to code. One family I spoke with, they said, no smartphones, no social media, no video games or interactive screens, but their 13-year-old was really interested in computer science, checked out computer science textbooks from the local library, and then he was allowed to use the family home computer to practice his coding skills, and then he won a coding scholarship to college in Ohio, and he's going to college on a full ride, and he never had a smartphone. So I think just we can help our kids use technology and develop skills. I appreciate what Mike was saying about encouraging our kids' interests, and we can do that in a way that doesn't mean handing them smartphones and social media. And the second principle was just screen entertainment was sparing and shared. So I'm not saying you can't enjoy a Friday night family movie night. A lot of these families, just if they engaged in screen entertainment, it was something done together, and it wasn't a daily habit, but it was something that was a treat, an occasion. Watch a family football game on a Saturday. So last is just T was trade screens for real life responsibilities and pursuits. And I'm sure you can think of all the things in your own community of what that would look like, but I offer examples in the book of how these families then, in restricting these freedoms in the virtual world, gradually allowed their children more freedoms, more responsibilities in real life, that actually helped them develop skills to progress them towards adulthood instead of the screens that stunt that development. And so, just the emphasis on teaching kids responsibility so that they can learn to love and serve others in their community. And I think just that framework of wanting our kids to love and serve God and to love and serve others. And so trying to fill their lives with skills that would allow them to serve people and opportunities to do that. First in the home with chores and things around the house, and then trying trying to help them have opportunities to serve their local communities, their churches, and their schools. And so that is the FEAST acronym. I also do briefly address the important role that schools can play. So schools like Chelsea are obviously leading the way in this, but just how much schools can work with parents to change the culture. And so I hope you'll pick up a copy, but that is my practical overview in a nutshell.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Claire. So I want to pick up sort of where you ended on schools and parents and the partnership there, but also drilling down on the F of FEAST, the find other families, because it seems to me that we have, again, we have sort of like a social network problem in the sense, and I think that John alluded to this in the first panel, like it's if you have a critical mass of your social group that is not on social media doesn't really matter. But if that sort of dynamic changes, even if you found other families who are doing a tech exit lifestyle as well, it seems to me like there's a certain point at which it tilts, right? And that becomes really difficult from a social perspective for teenagers. So I'm just curious if you guys have thoughts on how to sort of mitigate against that problem. If it just means we need to find even more families, right? Or how you think about that problem. Because again, the social networks are inherently social, right? So the minute that so much of your social life gets on there, it seems like to me it kind of tips the scales. It makes it all the more difficult.
You go first.
Okay, well, yes, I spent a lot of time thinking about this and trying to talk to parents about how to help them navigate this. The first thing I will say is even if your child is one of the only few that's not on a smartphone or social media, you're still making the right choice. And I realize there can be costs to that. But what one dad shared with me has really stuck with me. And he said, our decision on this was actually very friend filtering for our kids. Because if someone wasn't going to talk to my son and invite him to the social event going on because he wasn't on the group Snapchat chat, well, then that's not a real friend. And so it can be difficult, but he said, yeah, the friendships then that didn't really last, it's because that person just was not a good friend. But my kids actually did have friendships with kids who had access to the technology my kids didn't, but they were a true friend and they accommodated my son's difference. And I think that is a sign of real friendship, is being willing to accommodate the difference. And so I even talked to some of the grown kids and they said, yeah, I probably missed out on some of the inside jokes, but honestly, like my friends, like I never felt out of the loop. Like they reached out to me, they told me if I needed to know something our soccer team was doing. And so I think, again, just recognizing there are costs, but also true friends will actually work to accommodate the difference. And then the other thing I'll say is I think schools can actually play a role in helping parents, not just, banning phones from the school day, but communicating to parents like, hey, the culture of our school is that we're delaying smartphones. Like we're, as a school community, like we strongly encourage parents to not give smartphones until this age. And I think that can then help signal to parents, oh, okay, this is what I should do, or this is what the other parents at the school are doing. And some schools even took further steps. I mentioned in the book, like one school, a private Catholic school in Texas, they just have all their students agree to not have social media accounts. Like they have to sign a pledge to be a part of the school community. Parent and child both agree to that. While I'm a student at this school, I will not have a social media accounts. And that helps also protect the school day, even from the influence of the negative things that can happen on social media outside the school day, how that feeds negatively into the next school day. So those are just a couple ideas.
I would just add, I think institutions have a very important role to play here. Schools and churches too. I think churches should be doing more on this. Churches can easily be part of the problem. You may have been in a church where they have, QR code bulletin, right? Like scan the QR code in order to follow along with the service. The assumption is that you're going to have your smartphone out during the service, or churches that even, maybe this is an evangelical thing, not a Catholic thing probably, but, like text your questions to the pastor,
Or they encourage kids in the youth group to get on social media.
So, but they can go, churches, at the very least, like, don't do that. Try to be analog where you can, but I think churches can go further and say, we want this to be a phone-free church. Like, leave your phone in the car when you come to the church building. There's no reason you need it with you on Sunday morning. And of course, schools have a very important role to play too. The way I've sort of found my way into this topic is my doctoral work was on the relationship of freedom and authority. I published a book recently, earlier this year, kind of summarizing some of my work in this, called To Freedom. And my doctoral advisor was famous for saying, authority is the objective correlate of freedom. What does that? What the heck does that mean? Authority is the objective correlate of freedom. As Americans, we often think of freedom and authority in tension with each other. And that's because we often think of freedom as something only experienced by individuals. Individuals experience freedom by doing their own thing in isolation from others. But actually, because we're made for one another, we experience the fullest, richest forms of freedom when we're free to do things together. And the only way that we can be free to do things together is if there's an authority that kind of gives us direction, gives us permission, or gives us positive commandment or direction to go in a certain way. And the example I always use here is, singing hymns on Sunday morning, right? If Christian liberty meant that everybody should have the freedom to just sing whatever song comes into their head, like whatever hymn makes you feel closest to Jesus, just everybody just sort of belt that one out, right? I think I was actually at a youth group once that did exactly that. But what that means, that doesn't mean that everybody's free to sing, right? It means nobody's free to sing because it's just a cacophony. Singing is actually something that requires us harmonizing our voices together, which means an authority has to come along and say, open your hymnals to, or maybe it's projected on the screen. Hopefully it's an old-fashioned hymnal, but at least it's like this is what we're all going to sing. And is that a sacrifice of freedom? In one level, it's a sacrifice of the freedom to sing something else you might rather sing, but it's actually an expansion of freedom. And so schools that have said, we're going to take away the freedom of individual parents and students and saying no phones at school, that actually is experienced by the school community as an expansion of freedom, not a curtailing of freedom.
Well, that's really interesting, and it makes me think that perhaps we should kind of back up a little bit. You mentioned that freedom can be things that we do together. I could see a sort of devil's advocate argument saying, okay, we get the brain science stuff and everything, but social media is a great connector. It is a great way to be social, right? So I guess I just mentioned that to provide you both with an opportunity to really say your biggest objection to social media, especially for adolescents. I know, Claire, in your book, there's numerous anecdotes about this. So take the one that you think is perhaps most illustrative of the problem. But I think it's worth at least addressing that, right, given what Brad mentioned.
Yeah, no. So first, I'll just say social media has changed. It's not really social anymore. Instead, it's just recommendation media. I mean, people aren't really going on there to connect with their friends. The algorithm is saying, oh, you might like this video because XYZ person liked this video, and then it's just complete strangers online. I mean, it is not actually connecting people. The other piece I would say is the science shows us that the connections formed on social media are incredibly shallow. We don't get oxytocin through a screen. It's something that can only be released in real life interactions through eye contact and physical touch. And that is really what bonds humans with each other. It provides that depth of relationship. Kids are not getting oxytocin through a screen. They're just getting dopamine. And again, the dopamine just creates the craving. And the last piece I'll just mention on the research side with brain development is that children around 10 years old, between 10 to 12, start becoming more wired for social rewards and social feedback. Our brains, our reward center and our dopamine receptors start multiplying, and it's a natural process of human development that is trying to start turning us outward from our family unit to form more external relationships and friendships. Right at this time, kids are now getting on social media, and that brain development is being hijacked because those social rewards, that social feedback is on steroids on social media in a very unhealthy way that, again, is disconnected from the real life relationship and the oxytocin. And so kids are basically getting these really artificially high levels of dopamine, and it is making them actually over time more sensitive to those types of social rewards. So in brain development, we kind of see this really sensitive period of like looking outwards for kind of social peer feedback, and then it kind of normalizes over time. Kids who are on social media in that period of development actually become overly sensitive to that type of social rewards and social feedback. And this is in addiction science, it's known as sensitization, which means that then And that can be like a permanent brain change where they become sensitized to a particular stimulus, and the brain pathways have been wired and kind of fired together through the neurons. And so the rest of their life, those kinds of cues, that type of social reward creates a lot of compulsive behavior and craving. And so study out at the University of North Carolina found that to be the case with, they studied 6th and 7th grade students who were habitually checking social media, not even about the amount of time they were spending on it, just that they were frequently checking it throughout the day, and longitudinally it showed over time they became highly sensitized to those kinds of social rewards, divergent kind of brain development from what is normal. And so even at a neuroscience level, we can tell that the social media is really harmful for tweens and teens in that critical period of development. And then from a friendship standpoint, the irony is that it is not delivering the good that it promises of social connection. It really is making kids feeling lonelier and more isolated than ever because the connections are so shallow and they're disconnected from real life relationships. So that would be what I would say.
Just to put a finer point on that, I think we could say we're designed for connection with other people, right? But that's supposed to be qualitative, not quantitative, right? When you are spending time with another person, your kids goes on a play date with someone, comes back, you ask the kid how was it, and if they had a positive interaction with the person, they felt affirmed by the experience. But affirmation from another human being can take many, many different forms. There's not like one. There are many ways in which we show positive attention and emotion toward one another, and we are yearning for those kind of that richly varied spectrum of qualitative affirmation. You go on social media, and you don't really get that. You get it reduced to a qualitative thing. How many likes did I get? How many retweets did I get? And your brain is retrained to think in terms of, was I affirmed today? The answer is, well, I don't know. I only got 47 likes, and yesterday, and my friend. But you can compare immediately, right? We're especially young people who are wrestling with like craving affirmation. They often are tempted to this comparison, right? And that's a temptation that human beings have always had before social media. But when it's qualitative, it's sort of easy. You can easily sort of realize, you catch yourself, and be like, well, that's sort of stupid. Okay, like I have friends, they love me. That other person has friends, they love her. Who's more loved? Well, that's a stupid question to ask. But if you can be like, I got 47 likes today, and my friend got 150 likes, then it's really easy to tell yourself that person's more popular, that person's more affirmed. And so it's this really toxic perverting of our human desire for relationship into this totally quantitative mold.
So one more from me before I open up to you all. To return to a point you all made earlier, I think one of the responses, Brad, is, okay, fine, I'm going to lock down my kid's phone. I'm going to get Instagram off of it. I'm going to enable all the parental controls. Apple has all this new screen time technology. It's going to be fantastic. My kid will never have social media. And I know, Claire, you mentioned in your remarks, and again, read the book. The book is great on this. But I just wonder if you could go a little bit deeper into why that's not adequate, right? Because I do hear this a lot, is like, okay, we can stay on top of this. We can manage this. It in some ways does make sense to me that like we have these technologies there that are meant to do this. Why is that not good enough?
Yeah, so I will just reiterate. It is really impossible to effectively lock down a smartphone. I think it's easier maybe for adults, like when you're doing this for yourself, there's all these things you can dumb down. It's really difficult if you're a parent trying to lock down a teen's smartphones. I mean, they know all the workarounds, they know all the bugs, all the loopholes. And I've heard parents say, well, we're going to get them a smartphone, but no social media. Any child safety expert will tell you that just isn't possible, really. It's just not true, because even if you block the Instagram app from their phone, they can basically get to Instagram.com through any web browser on the phone. And every app these days actually has an in-app browser. I mean, I've heard story after story of parents saying, my kid accessed pornography through this in-app browser. Like, we had no idea. That was just an educational game. The worst example was like some child accessed a porn site through a parental control software app that was like installed on the device. It had a support page where you could get help, and that connected to the internet. And the irony was that because that was another parental control software, the separate porn filter they had installed on on the phone couldn't access the parental control software app to block that on their filter to block that on the in-app browser. So there are just too many portals to the internet to oversee. I think it's much more easy to control a home family computer, whereas Brad mentioned there's one web browser on the home computer, and maybe there's a couple, maybe Google Chrome and Safari, but still there's limited web browsers. It's not an app-based interface, and you can then whitelist than the website. So it's a lot easier to effectively lock down something like a computer in the family home. Also, that's a large screen that's public. I mean, the smartphone is inherently individualized and private. It's very difficult for a parent to even see what a child is doing on it. They carry it with them in their pocket. And so I really recommend a total opt-out, delaying the age of first cell phone as long as possible, because even the texting, guys, to be honest, it's addicting to a teen. So even like the dumb phones, like we still have to be careful with. I'm more willing to accept a dumb phone, especially for an older high school kid who's driving. But even that, I mean, I can't tell you all the parents who say, as soon as they got the phone, they were compulsively just drawn to the texting. Every time they got a new text, it was a dopamine hit. And so the point just being that the amount of apps and the notifications, everything they provide, not only are the parental controls falling short, but just the design is addictive. I mean, it really incentivizes a compulsive use, and it's very difficult for a developing child to use a smartphone, an incredibly powerful tool with self-control and maturity. And so delaying as long as possible and then opting for one of the smartphone alternatives I recommend in my book is the surest protection for our kids, both from the dangerous content and predators that can too easily access them through, again, these thousands of portals to the internet on a smartphone, but then also from the addictive design that this has and the effects that has on our children's brains.
All right, questions. If you have questions, please raise your hand. We may or may not have a mic, but yeah, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we've used Microsoft Family Safety. We used Apple computers for a while, and then the Apple parental control is much more buggy. The Microsoft has some significant issues, which I won't talk about in front of my kids because they don't know loopholes. But
ask them after.
The Microsoft's not perfect, but it's pretty darn good. But yes, the router. I've been very slow to do. I've heard like the router solution is actually the best way to go, and my wife and I actually finally like set up the router controls. Of course, the key thing there is that's where like a smartphone. One of the things it has is
Data.
It makes no, not just that, but it can, even if it's otherwise dumbed down, it can create a personal hotspot, which then of course bypasses the router controls. So I'm told the Griffin router is the best. That's what child safety experts swear by. We don't actually have that. So we've kind of done, sort of been very intentional about when we introduce things. Like the Microsoft Family Safety has worked pretty well for us. But I think, especially if you have other devices and such, the router solution is.
I'll just say, so the Griffin router is what our family has. It's great. It's very easy to set up and control as a parent, and then you just control all internet access in the home through that. You can even just shut it down at night, so you can just have the internet turn off at 10 p.m., so there's no way a child could get up in the middle of the night and get on a computer or something like that. Now, again, the smart connected devices that have their own data plan, well, then they can bypass Wi-Fi. But if you've kept those out of the home and it's truly just internet access, that at least really you can control any type of internet access coming into your home. And it automatically filters porn sites, but then you can even block more websites. Like if you don't want youtube.com to be accessible, you just block it at the router level. So I think it's a very effective.
And it'll also block like your regulated smart TV too, which is.
Other questions? Going right here. Yeah, if you can wait for the mic, that'll be better for the video. So thank you.
Yeah, I guess my question was kind of along those same lines. One of the things that we just struggled with recently is I grew up in a very tech-savvy home, and one of the ways that my family in the military connects is we get together once a month and play video games, which is very convenient when you have a family who lives in Germany and North Dakota and everything. But something that we just struggled with recently is we upgraded our TV because the last one was dying, And now the new TV we have is super, super smart, and we hate it. So beyond the router suggestions, I mean, of course, I went, because of growing up in technology and having unfettered access, I decided what I could find, and I was able to access all of the things. So are there TV brands that you would recommend, or would the router suggestion be the way that you would go, or what are your suggestions for the TV specifically, not just smartphones and other devices?
I mean, we have a Roku TV which has a parental controls. So there's a parental pin that has to be entered to install any. So some smart TVs have like a web browser app. I guess we could download that up. So you obviously don't want that. But yeah, we just have a very limited number of apps on there, and then the ones that there are like require password logins and so on. But the other thing is, I mean, it's just really simple. Is like, well, it depends. 'Cause some of them you can actually control through a button on the TV. But if you just hide the remote, and like again, that's the purpose-driven thing. It's like, okay, you want to use okay, I will give you the remote to turn it on for this period of time, but the kid doesn't otherwise even have the ability to turn the TV on.
Yeah, I would just add, so I do think, unfortunately, we're increasingly just having smart devices come into our home. And as much as you can just, again, it will depend on what the device is, but most of them you can password protect. And that's just like my biggest recommendation, even for parents, your smartphones, anything, just like having it have a password that an adult has to enter in order to have access to it, I think is like just the surest protection from our kids coming across something without us knowing, or without us being aware they were using it. I mean, taking the remote is great. We've done that before, but then we actually just got rid of our smart TV and got a really old school dumb TV. So it's just not even a concern. So I like try to encourage parents, like the more dumb alternatives that you can get, you make it easier on yourself. And then if there are certain things in the home, like I would, even Peloton bikes. Like I had a mom tell me their son accessed pornography through the Peloton bike, and they had no idea, just like in the middle of the night. And so I think that the more technology becomes smart and we have these things in our home, just trying to password protect them, or getting rid of them entirely, really, if that's possible.
And I would just note, I mean, because we actually did for a long time, didn't have the smart TV. And then, part of the problem is it's so hard to buy one.
That was you found a non-smart TV?
Just
I mean, it's like old school. Yeah, it was like someone was giving away their TV.
Like the bunny ears on there and everything?
We have rabbit ears, and then it has like an HDMI that we can connect to a laptop if we want to stream something.
This is what I say is I think it's important as adults. Sometimes we make these justifications to ourselves. Well, we could do that, but then that's just gonna make things so difficult for us. But really, generally, in making it more difficult for you, you're actually making it better for you. And then that's where my example of I have to email myself links that people text me, a pain, but then it's better this way. And when we it was so difficult, actually take my laptop and plug an HDMI into the TV to watch something on Netflix, right? It's so difficult. It takes like a whole extra minute, right? Well, I mean, okay, but if that means that maybe you're slightly less prone to just binge watch things, then that's probably good for you as an adult too.
I have one more recommendation on that. More and more friends of ours are just getting projectors, and then they just project a movie or something on the wall, but they don't want to just have a permanent TV as like a fixture in the home. And so then they just, pull out the projector when it's a Friday night family movie night, and obviously the projector doesn't connect to the internet, so it's just easy solution.
Other questions? Got one back here.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Question, I like the idea of the educate and explain, especially for like a teenager, think 14-year-old boy, 16-year-old boy. So I'm looking for some practical, not that everything up to now hasn't been practical, but practical explanation of that, or tools to use in the explain, educate. They can read the book.
Yeah, no, I try to put some in the appendix, so it may not be in the text of the chapter, but I list some possible resources. I think for teens, the documentary, The Social Dilemma, is great. It provokes a lot of conversations like, what is the business model behind this? And I think no teen wants to feel like they're being manipulated by a giant tech company who just wants all their data and their time. Kind of has a repulsive effect on most teens. So that's a helpful documentary. On like the brain stuff, a good kind of, there's like a home guide called Kids, Brains, and Screens by an organization called Screen Strong. And I've been reading through it just to try to understand the brain research, but it explains it to the level of probably like a 10-year-old to 16-year-old could like really understand it well. But from the perspective of talking to kids, it's like, this is what you want for your brain. This is what you want for your friendships. Here's how these things are undermining it. But it also gives them like positive practicals, like, hey, pursue these things instead. So I found that to be a great resource for parents to use like with kids. Those are just two, but I think there's more in the appendix. The Social Dilemma is the documentary.
Which is on Netflix, which I think requires a smart TV or some sort of internet access. So see if you can find it elsewhere.
VHS version?
Yeah, exactly. I think we might have time for maybe one, maybe two more questions. We have one. Yeah, John, right up here front.
This is softball. In the context of this conversation about how hard it is to actually log, I mean, there are probably literally dozens of browsers in the average home. Could you say a little bit about why the victory in Free Speech Coalition v. Paxton was so important?
Oh, yeah. So for those who don't follow the Supreme Court as closely, about 2 weeks ago, the court ruled 6-3 to uphold a Texas law requiring pornography websites to age restrict their material. And this was just a huge victory because there's 24 states that have passed these types of laws. The court applied intermediate scrutiny, which is just huge for just the future of other state laws that can be brought to protect kids from online obscenity. But as Brad and I wrote together, an amicus brief explaining all the ways parental controls and filters fall short. Having the websites themselves age restrict their material is a huge piece of backing parents up because it also helps solve some of the collective issues. And we didn't really get into policy solutions, but the law, Brad's point on authority, the law can be play a critical role in providing the kind of social coordination that we need to be more free, to have our children be free of pornography, to have the government say that these companies need to age restrict their material online. And so now it means if a child were to accidentally click on a link to Pornhub, they're not immediately observing all this obscene material. And likewise, it also helps me as a parent if I haven't given a smartphone social media to my child, but if another child on the school bus can on a smartphone easily pull up Pornhub and put it in my son's face, like that's a problem. And so these laws do a lot to critically back parents up so that it's not on parents to age restrict every possible pornography website. I'm like, we don't do this in the brick and mortar world. We don't tell parents, you need to run around town and make sure that every store isn't selling pornography to your kid. The store has to age verify and restrict that to adults. And now, thankfully, we're applying that logic to the virtual world.
Yeah, I would caution parents against, Virginia is one state that has such a law, right? So this is a huge step in the right direction. There's a long way to go and several years before it really helps parents significantly because, first of all, there's a lot of enforcement action that actually has to be brought. And then, right now, websites like Twitter and Reddit are exempted, and you can access huge amounts of hardcore pornography there. So, it's great that Pornhub's going to have to put these restrictions on. We're going to need this on a much broader scale. But that's what's great. The way the Supreme Court opinion was written makes it,
allows that,
gives scope for legislators, if there's the political will, to, I think, really change the shape of the internet over the next few years.
Yeah.
Time for one more if there is one. There's one. Yep.
I'm 73.
Should be on, I think. Yep.
On. Okay. I didn't want to say anything up to this point because, unlike most of you, I'm not a parent. I'm not a grandparent. I was a teacher for many years, and I am a technological troglodyte in all capital letters. So for the first panel, I think there was a discussion where the acronym MAHA was used as if every literate person knows what it is. Well, I didn't. So I spent some time applying my decaying analytical skills towards figuring out what it was, and I think I got it right. But I have a flip phone. And so, Claire, I was listening to what you were saying, and I looking at the title of your book, Tech Exit. And I said, wow, I'm definitely for it, but I never was really in it in the first place. I do have a flip phone, and I was tempted to ask a bunch of you, how much damage would it do to family relations and what have you if all of us went to no more than a flip phone, and it's the smartphone that's the devil's entry into the whole thing because of all of the things it can do. And my basic problem with even flip phones, but not so much, is our Lord says faith comes by hearing. And that means each of us with a body and a soul should be interacting with other people directly with bodies and souls. And even with the flip phone, there's something angelic about it and very, very dangerous, because you know who can take advantage of communication. We are basically reduced to a spirit that can be manipulated, and everything I've heard today with the smartphone just reinforces it to the ultimate degree. I want to thank Emil, whom I know, and I think the world of him, and he knows that, and just a fabulous job in every aspect of this, and including bringing these very talented and smart younger people, because I'm an old person and I don't have any children or grandchildren, and I look for hope in the younger generation, and I absolutely see it. And Brad, this is for you, whom I have not even met. During the last break, your son, your 11-year-old Oliver, I'm 73. He came up and started talking to me as if I were, hey, maybe a little bit older, but I can talk to this person. And so I responded right away. So something very good is happening in your household.
Well, thank you, Patrick. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts there.
One thought into what you said with the flip phone. I think to give a very pessimistic form of optimism, or optimism form of, I think one of my optimism about what's happening with AI is that it could really push us back toward embodied face-to-face interaction. Because you mentioned the flip phone, there's stories you may have read, more and more stories come out of recent months about, successful scams, even all the way up to the Secretary of State, right? An AI imitation of Marco Rubio calling up, foreign dignitaries. And so, you think that like phone scams are bad now, once AI forms those become commonplace, it's going to be harder and harder to tell if you're actually hearing true words from a real human being on the other end, and texting or calling. So I think one effect of this sort of disorientation of not necessarily being able to tell truth from reality is we're going to be pushed back toward real face-to-face interactions, and some of these technologies will be back in their proper place as supplements, not substitutes.
I was just going to say, because I forgot, if you want to spread the word about this tech exit, thank you for flagging my book, there are postcards on the table where the books are for sale. I would just encourage you to grab a couple and share those with other parents, because really it will take all of us working together. And so anyway, those are for you. And if you also want to discuss the book with other parents, on my book website, thetechexit.com, I have a PDF you can download that's a discussion guide for the book that has prompts for conversations and questions that you can actually read through as a book group of parents at your school or your church. And so I would just direct you to thetechexit.com for more resources, and then the postcards are out there for just help spreading the word.
Quickly, yep. Interesting.
Yeah, that's why I would recommend the alternatives I have in my book have a lot more. Yeah, because unfortunately, like flip phones, many of them now connect to the internet, and that's, yeah.
Whole new world. Well, we need to leave it there, guys. But before we do, just a couple closing thoughts here. First of all, thank you all for joining us here. This is our second annual summer conference that we've done here at Chelsea Academy. We hope to continue this as a great outreach tool into the community to get what we're all about here at Chelsea out there. We hope that you will stay connected to what we do here at Chelsea. If you have school-age kids and are looking for a great Catholic school, send them to our admissions office. If you have a little extra cash and you want to support our school, send them to me in the advancement office. But really, most of all, we hope that you guys enjoyed the day today. I want to say a special thank you to our volunteers and our Chelsea Parents Association. That would be Alex Clausen, Jen Bursma, all of our volunteers on that wonderful lunch. We couldn't have done it without them. So anyways, thank you guys so much for coming. Good night.